All right, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you here. Before we get started and to the report itself, I just wanted to kick off with a few housekeeping items. We will be reserving the last 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, so please drop any questions you have in the Q&A chat. We'll get to them at the end, and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. You can save them for the end, or you can type them in as they come up. We also have a quick survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So as you're logging off, just make sure to drop in your responses. But we really appreciate that. So why don't I get started by introducing our speakers. Today we have Scott Davis, who is a senior partner and chief growth officer at Profit. Scott has played an integral role in the development and oversight of BRI since we launched our first study back in 2016. With more than 20 years of experience in brand, marketing strategy, and new product development, Scott brings deep expertise to help uncover what makes brands relevant to consumers today. Joining him is Marisa Mulvhill. Marisa is a partner and the head of our brand and activation platform. This is Marisa's first year co-authoring the BRI, and we are so happy to have her expertise. She really brought a fresh and insightful perspective to this year's report. Drawing on nearly 20 years of experience in marketing, brand, and customer experience, Marisa brings a deep understanding of how to build relevant brands that drive growth. I know they're both really excited to share their insights on what made this year's index so interesting, so I will turn it over to Scott.
Thanks, Julia. Welcome, everybody. Marisa and I could not be more excited to share with you Profit's 2021 Brand Relevance Index, or what we lovingly call it at Profit, the BRI. Where once again, we uncovered so many interesting findings, and we're going to share a lot of those with you today. For me, the number one most interesting is that 3 out of the top 10 performers from the last time we did this, just 15 months ago, are the only 3 that remain in the top 10 today. So we'll talk about that. A number of surprises. 2 healthcare brands popped into the top 10 for the first time ever. You might think you know why, and you're probably right, but it's super interesting. There's a bunch of risers. A Tesla coming in at number 25. There's some brands that fell. Disney, what happened is the question mark. And some like I like to call head snappers in terms of what happened there. The fall of YouTube as far as it did, and we'll talk about that. And then the meteoric rise of Amy's Kitchens for the calendar year 2020. So really interesting findings. This is the 6th year we've done this in the US, and you'll see that we continue to let the voice of the consumer and what is most relevant to them lead the way in helping us determine what are the most relevant brands in the US right now. As you could all imagine, this year's study raises one of the biggest questions none of us really have the answer to, but we're all trying to address. Was 2020 a brand anomaly year tied to the number of unprecedented events that we all experienced? And now this represents the new normal for brands. Or said another way, I said this to my wife, does Netflix ever enter back into the top 10 again after what happened in 2020, after being there for 5 straight years? And equally interesting and curious question is, does Peloton stay in the top 5 as we go back to a quote unquote normal world? One thing that I know we're certain of in studying brands over the past 12 months of pandemic living, political and social upheaval, a lot of, or a little limited real life interaction. One thing that was really true is consumers, all of us, sought brands that enabled compassion and community and connection and comfort and the occasional escape from everything that was going on around us. And they also, in 2020, more than any year prior, they showed that brands show up in a truthful way, a transparent way, a purposeful way, and when possible, publicly commit to building a brighter future, which a lot of brands did in 2020. So we're thrilled to unpack all of these points and your questions over the next 45 minutes. So let's dive in. First of all, for those of you who do not know Profit, we are a digital growth and transformation consultancy. Our purpose in life is to help our clients unlock growth, or what we call uncommon growth they could not get to on their own. And they walk in through many different doors. It could be a big brand challenge that they're facing. It could be a big demand generation challenge, getting more customers in the door. It could be a rewiring of the customer experience that they're trying to pay off through their brand promise. Or it could be figuring out how to engage their employee base to better bring their overall brand or company purpose to life. Quite honestly, most of our projects cut across everything that you see on the page. And we're fortunate, we were looking at this yesterday, to have served 25 of the top 100 most relevant brands. So super energized to present these findings to you. On the next page, as you could guess, we believe winning brands do have one thing in common. They are relentlessly relevant. We're often asked why we did this study for the first time back in 2015. And the answer for us is threefold. One, our vice chairman, co-founder, brand godfather, David Acker, who's written over 20 books on the topic of building brands, wrote a book called Brand Relevance 10 years ago that, from my perspective, totally transformed and shifted the brand landscape to go beyond brand awareness, brand preference, even brand loyalty, and dig for something much deeper. And we wanted to build a model around his leading edge work to start to actually quantify what is now becoming the governing definition of what a strong brand actually is. And that is around relevance. So that was the first reason, is following Dave Acker's footsteps. Second, we work with a lot of clients and companies over the years, and there's always questions about all of the other brand studies that were done out there. And our clients would constantly ask us to try to unpack what the studies meant for them, how to read them, what to do with them. If there was a financial valuation put against the brand, like, how do I drive that up? What's the algorithm that goes into it? And we said there's got to be a different way that is just less black box, more transparent, super easy to understand, maybe only using one variable instead of 6 or 7, that being consumers and how they see the world, and really try to create something that was de novo, but that was something that's going to be super repeatable over time. And finally, we wanted to give our clients and any company that's listening to this webinar a roadmap for how to build relevance as you continue to drive your brand forward. And the results of the study, I believe, provide a really strong on-ramp and roadmap on what to focus on as the highest priority areas to either drive your relevance forward, maintain relevance, or fix relevance issues that you are that you may be having. So on the next slide, how do we define it? This is, it's relevance is, we have books and lots of white papers on it. Quite simply, the best brands of the world, those that are most relevant, the ones that we can't really live without, are those that constantly and consistently inspire us, and they move us to action. They make smart, bold moves that amaze customers, often push competitions or competitors out of consideration, and at time open up new subcategories and new markets that they never knew they could enter. And most of them, and you'll see this especially in the top 50 that Marisa and I will talk about, they remain unwaveringly authentic to who they are, their purpose in the world, and why they came to be in the first place. And as you'll see, as we go through the results of the study, it took a long time to get to these, I'll call these 16 drivers. Those are the bullet points under these 4 categories and these 4 principles. But this is, if you want an algorithm to build relevance, crush it on these 16, and you are going to be the most relevant brand in the world. Easier said than done. But we measure all 4 of these. How obsessed are you with it? Is your brand with customers? Is you a brand that you can't imagine living without? meets an important need in my life? Is it a brand that makes me happy? Is it one that connects with me on an emotional level? Is it pragmatic? Is it there when I need it? Does it make my life easier? Does it live up to its promises? Is it consistent? Is it distinctively inspired? Does it make me feel inspired? Does it make me feel energized? Is it modern? Is it in touch? Does it align with how I think of the world and what's important to me? And lastly, and a critical point, is it a brand that continues to reinvent itself, pervasively innovative? It just continues to push the status quo in its category, engages with me in new and creative ways, has better products, services, experiences, communications, channels, value props than the competition, and is always finding new ways to meet my needs. And what's cool, and Marisa will talk about the methodology in a second, you don't have to crush it on all 16. You could really just really do well in a few of these areas, and that drives your overall relevance score. When we talk about this, all 16 of these attributes, it originally was a list of, I think, 57, and we modeled it back to these 16 that all those other 57 laddered up into these 16, but they are all measured equally for every single brand. And then, one of the big questions on the next page that we've been getting asked, especially this year, and tied to my opening comments, brands have never been more relevant. This is in the 5 or 6 years that we've been doing this in the US and across the globe. Every year, relevance scores go up and down, and there's not really any pattern. Brands played a more important role in our lives in 2020 than any year prior. It was really, as it says here, it was a transformational year for brand relevance in the face of everything: the health crisis, social unrest, political upheaval. I know we did in my household, we turned to different brands to meet different needs in our lives at different times, to sometimes fill the voids, to sometimes help us navigate, to sometimes just help us get through. And that's why the average relevance scores across all brands, all 230 brands in the US that we studied, went up by 5 points. And that has never happened before in our study. So that'll be another thing that we look as we go to the 2022 study. Do we continue to increase at that level or not? Or again, was 2020 an anomaly? And then I think kind of the quote unquote money page that when we present the brand relevance index to our clients or do a showcase of this presentation, the thing, and the CFO is in the room, this is the page that really kind of knocks their socks off in terms of, and has been consistent for every study that we've done. When we look at our top 50 most relevant brands, and we compare it to the S&P 500 from over a 10-year CAGR growth, on the revenue side, it outperforms it by 230%, and then 1,040% increase on the profit side. So relevance and brand do drive growth and drive growth in meaningful ways. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marisa to take you into the background of the study itself.
Getting into the meat of it. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into the results, I want to make sure we level set a bit on the methodology. So we studied 13,000 consumers in the US. The Brand Relevance Index is actually the only brand index that is entirely based on consumer input. So we're getting it straight from the consumers of the brands. We're talking to folks who have, they're evaluating brands that have been in their consideration set. It's a Gen Pop sample, so taken from across the US. They evaluated brands in 25 categories, and actually there were 228 unique brands in the study that were evaluated. They get evaluated on the 16 attributes on a 7-point scale. And each respondent actually only answers questions on 5 brands. So we fielded it in late October, early November, we captured 2020 in all of its glory, and are reporting on that now in 2021. But the data was collected in 2020 in the midst of a crazy year. So many of you, I'm sure, have already seen this, but these are the top 50 brands in the US. Some interesting things, right? So Apple still holding the #1 spot for the 6th year in a row, a brand that really continues to be the most relevant brand. This year really going big with Apple TV as their latest and greatest way of connecting with consumers. But they really continue to innovate, continue to inspire, and continue to find ways to drive relevance. One of the interesting moves this year, Peloton, skyrocketing from a spot in the 30s last year to #2 this year. So a brand that really obviously met the moment when everybody could no longer go to the gym or go to their favorite fitness class with at-home fitness, but also an incredibly powerful brand that built tons of community, tons of connections, and really found ways to bring some calm and some joy into people's lives in the midst of the pandemic. Some other interesting things to take note of. So social media brands, you see very few now in the top 50. Pinterest, one of the few, but really a lot fell significantly. Facebook is the last brand of all the brands that we tested in the study. You really see a lack of trust that really significantly hindered those brands' success. So even a brand like TikTok, which does well with our younger respondents, not broadly relevant across all age groups, and really still struggled in the area of trust. We see some interesting moves from the healthcare brands. So Johns Hopkins and Mayo both landing in our top 10. Obviously, Johns Hopkins made the news a lot as a brand that showed up as soon as the pandemic hit. They immediately had their COVID tracker. They were really the most trusted source of information at a time when people didn't know what data they could turn to. Johns Hopkins was there with information that people could really rely on. And Mayo Clinic, again, continues to be innovative, trusted, and really a pragmatic choice for a lot of consumers. So we saw, one last thing that I thought was really interesting, just that you see the number of brands in our top 50 for whom content is really their key way of differentiating and driving relevance. So whether that's obvious brands like Netflix, or even brands like Peloton or Lego or Pixar or Disney, which use content as a critical driver in their success. So content over platforms might be one of the themes that we could think about. Scott, what did you see?
Yeah, there's a few things that I found really interesting about this year, and some that were super surprising. Automotive. We've never seen this many automotive brands in our top 50 in all the studies that we've done with BRI. And really, as you look back at 2020, consumers all of us took to the roads and tried to find different ways to get away, not being able to do air travel. And cars became in a lot of ways a lifeline for escapism. And by the way, the used car market was on fire last year. So a lot of these brands not only were escapism, but also because the used car sales went through the roof. So the automotive category was super interesting to me. Just the notion, which is not surprising, that this is a year where we wanted to be entertained, we wanted to play, and we just wanted to be distracted from everything that was going on around us. And in fact, almost a third of our top 50 brands are entertainment/play brands. Whether it was on your preferred device, in your car, on your favorite podcast, in your basement, at your kid's desk, in their bedroom. Brands like Netflix and NPR and Marvel and Hulu, and some of these are outside the top 50. They're in the top 100. Spotify, Xbox, PlayStation, Fisher-Price, Blizzard. I mean, these brands, they're trusted. They continue to surprise and delight. Some of them were helped to teach. They all engaged us in ways that, in particular this year, were hyper personal to our consumption patterns, because our consumption patterns were so different in 2020 than any year previously. And I also think that's interesting in this, consumers are not gluttons for all forms of entertainment. As most of the big news brands, like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, even USA Today, they failed to differentiate and engage, and fell in the bottom 50% of our study. I love the fact that Instacart joined the top 50 as expected, and that Robinhood made it to our list for what I believe will be the hottest second of its life. This was done before all the madness that took place in January. I also think a few other things, Marisa. Purpose, I know it feels oversaturated to a lot of folks, but it still matters, and it mattered more than ever to consumers. And we did a separate study of profit. We found that consumers who saw employees being treated well at different brands would choose the one that treated their employees the best over another brand. So purpose matters to consumers, and it's often brought to life by your employees. So culture matters, and you'll see that's why Chick-fil-A and Costco and Pixar and Trader Joe's and Amy's and Peloton, these are purpose-based brands whose employees ooze the brand's ethos as much as we all feel it as a consumer. And then the last point I'll make is I love myth busting and trying to kind of go against the grain in some of the findings of what you would expect. So, the first myth is that big box retailers are going away. And if I look at our top 100 brands, Costco and Sephora and REI and Target and IKEA all landed in the top 100, most on the heels of providing remarkable in-store experiences. Obviously, a lot of them have gone online too, but big box is not totally going away. So that was my first myth. Second one is that legacy, quote unquote, old dusty brands are not interesting or innovative. And I would say, well, don't go telling Lego that. Don't tell Olay that. Don't tell Dove or Band-Aid or Tide or Clorox or Hershey's that. I mean, these are all brands that once again landed in our top 50 or top 100. They're dependable, they're super indispensable, and they're also really innovative if you look behind each of those brands and what they've done over the last few years. And then I'm just going to pick up on something that Marisa said. The final myth that I like to bust is that just because brands show up every day in our lives doesn't mean they're truly relevant to our day-to-day lives. And a lot of these brands, consumers in a lot of ways were saying, I probably could actually live without them. I know this is counterintuitive, but you look at brands like Starbucks and McDonald's, and then Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, as Marisa mentioned, and they are all in the bottom third of our index. Many of them have become ubiquitous, commoditized, or just not as relevant as they once were. And some of them have trust issues, some of them have innovation and inspiration issues, and some of them just are not connecting well emotionally. And in fact, Marisa talked about the dead last one being Facebook. 8 out of the bottom 10 brands in our study are fast food brands. Obviously, Chick-fil-A broke the mold. They're in our top 50, but McDonald's and Subway and Burger King and Wendy's and KFC and Chili's and Taco Bell and Popeyes, this was not a good year for them as being relevant in our lives. And I could go on for another hour, Marisa, but I don't think we have enough time.
Yeah. I mean, I think just, Scott, what really is interesting when you think about this at the whole, when you look at these brands in the top 10, to your point, they all showed up in a way that met the moment. I mean, 2020 gave us a year that nobody was ready for and nobody was expecting. But those brands in the top 10, they all were able to quickly shift, pivot, adapt, and show up for consumers in a way that was incredibly powerful and meaningful. So whether it was, launching the COVID index, or teaching spinning classes from their homes, or helping people bake bread, all of these brands showed up in a way that allowed them to really quickly help consumers survive and thrive a year they hadn't planned for. So if we keep going, Julia.
So this is our page on industry leaders. So these are the brands that did the best within each of their respective categories and industries. Some of these look familiar already. They popped in our top 50. Some of them were outside the top 50. I'd say my guess is they're all in our top 75 or 80. And there's been a lot of change on these over time. Some have stayed since the beginning of this study, like Southwest has stayed exactly where it was 5 or 6 years in a row. Nike has stayed there. Folgers, I used to work at Procter & Gamble, so it makes me very, even though they're not a P&G brand anymore, it makes me very happy to see Folgers still there. A few that I love talking about, one of our clients is Chick-fil-A, and they continue to stay in our top 50. And they went through a truly transformative year where they pivoted from being an in-dining experience to one of the most remarkable drive-through experiences around the country, and obviously through delivery food operators like Uber Eats. And they continue to figure out how to get to the quality of food, that Southern hospitality, quote unquote, it's my pleasure, while just breaking sales records, because people loved Chick-fil-A even more during the pandemic and sought it out, as I believe it was a respite from cooking at home, and it's something they could always depend on, and they knew they were going to be treated well, and it was a great escape for them. I mentioned before Amy's Kitchen blasting into our top 25. It's just I'm again a personal fan of Amy's Kitchen. It's purpose-based. It was family started, which I just love, and it still has the spirit of the family and the kind of the initial idea of why it came to be. It's healthy, it's beloved, and they continue to innovate and inspire and connect in really emotional ways. And I think, for me, it's one of the feel-good stories of this year's study. USAA is a brand we talk about a lot. They continue to serve those who serve in ways that are just superior across all categories that they play in. They continue to win award after award in terms of product satisfaction and innovation. But not only that, they're always graded as having the highest quality, the highest satisfaction, and the highest loyalty, which is always super interesting to me. Is it because of the connection to USAA, and USAA is in the hearts of their customers, or is it really because it's so great? And I think great brands, it doesn't really matter. I think they're one and the same. And then the last one I'll mention, and I'll turn it back to Marisa, is Costco. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but Costco was the bulk buying leader before bulk buying was cool. And 2020 was the year that we all bought in bulk in ways that we never thought we needed to or had to, as often as we did. And to Marisa's point, Costco met the moment decades earlier. I mean, it's a massive organization, but they were able to grow by $10 billion, and I'm sure serve countless more members than the year before, and still deliver that ridiculous in-store experience that all of us that are Costco members love to experience as a member and as a shopper. So those are a few that come to mind for me, Marisa. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think obviously, Amazon continuing to show up as a brand that served so many of our pragmatic needs this year was, no surprise. It's, a top retailer as well as in our top 10. And, in the hospitality space, interestingly, many of the hospitality brands did well this year, Hilton being the leader. But, I think really a lot of that came down to exceeding people's expectations in a really difficult time where people were fearful of what the hotel experience might be like. Hilton really went above and beyond to make people feel comfortable and safe and, cared for during a time when, going to a hotel was much more fraught than usual. And so, that's being able to kind of exceed those expectations during a highly emotional time as an incredibly powerful way to connect and drive relevance with consumers. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time now talking broadly about some of the themes that emerged as we looked across the brands that were rising, the brands that were falling, and really those that kind of landed in our top 50. Obviously, as we all know, right, 2020 had political upheaval, social unrest, a global health crisis. And through all of that, we really, humans still felt this core human need that was being unfulfilled in the normal ways, right? We couldn't hang out with our friends, we couldn't go to work and chit chat with our colleagues or go to the gym. And so people turn to brands to fill a lot of those core human needs. So we'll talk about the 5 kind of common themes that we saw across, but it really comes down to brands filling these kind of core human needs of comfort, connection, joy, truth, and purpose. So the first one, so obviously in a time where people were often worried and concerned and had a lot of anxiety, brands that comforted them, that provided them with some inner peace, were brands that drove relevance. So Sephora focused a lot on self-care and the desire for people to take care of themselves, to relax, to use this time they had to improve their skincare routine. And so Sephora really focused a lot of their branding there. IKEA helping people turn their homes into a space that they could teach school, work, exercise, do everything they needed to do all in one place. And IKEA did a lot to really help people rediscover their homes and make them a place they could love. And then finally, KitchenAid, we obviously touched on everyone becoming bread baking geniuses, but KitchenAid really found ways to try to connect people into some of these newfound baking passions, and really connect people into that kind of comforting activity while they were at home. So this second one, obviously, right, we all craved connection when we couldn't find it in the normal ways. So obviously Peloton has done an incredible job of building community among their members. Obviously fitness communities, but also, more personal communities, whether that was Black Girl Magic or Peloton Moms. Everyone could find a place for themselves and find communities of like-minded enthusiasts. So no surprise, they landed in our number 2 spot. Etsy is a brand that has always really connected with the crafting community, but a lot of people suddenly found time on their hands for more crafting than usual in 2020. And so, Etsy found ways to create discussion boards and enable their community members to share ideas and connect over their passion for knitting or or sewing. So all of those different community groups found ways to connect. And then finally, Xbox. I mean, I can tell you, I have a teenager. I have 2 teenagers. They spend an inordinate amount of time connecting with their friends over the gaming platforms. And so whether that was Xbox or PlayStation, there were so many different ways that that people were using the social media platforms as critical ways to connect. And Xbox really did an excellent job of focusing so much of their energy on their cloud project, which enabled more of this connection and interactivity among teenagers and adults alike. And then, Scott talked a bit about this one at the beginning, but obviously we saw a large number of brands focused on toys, on play, on gaming, on different ways that we could find those small moments of joy. So obviously in a time where there was a lot of darkness, everybody was looking for small moments of joy. And, Pixar being the number 1 brand for makes me happy and connects with me emotionally. That with movies this year like Onward and Soul, they just found so many ways to uplift families and help them connect with each other. Fisher-Price has been always a trusted brand for toddlers. But with parents, navigating Zoom preschool, there was nothing more than that they needed than a brand that they could use that, took their children off the screen and connected in physical ways that, parents could feel good about. And then, obviously Lego, similar, but interestingly, Lego also was not just a toy brand for kids this year. They focused a lot of their attention also on connecting with adults who were also looking, whether through jigsaw puzzles or Legos, were looking for ways to add some physical play and escapism into their lives. And so, Lego spent a lot of time focusing on those aspects of their brand as well. So, it was a brand that ranked really highly and makes me feel inspired. Scott, did you want to talk about truth?
Yep. So this one's should not be a total surprise in 2020, but with so much happening so fast, we were all desperate and clinging to information coming to us, but coming to us from sources that we trusted, and it was a year where it was tough to figure out who we should trust and who we shouldn't, and it's a year where truth and where science and where other things really came to the forefront. And to the brands, we've already mentioned Johns Hopkins, but it's just such a great example of always having this set of beliefs and values that align with my own is one of the key drivers of its relevance. And it's just so easy to see why they got to such a high score. They're not just a health provider, but they became the truth teller and created the COVID-19 dashboard just a day or two after doctors diagnosed the first case in the US. And almost overnight, it became the definitive authority for a lot of us that were super anxious inside and outside of healthcare. And this is one where to my opening comments, was this just a year for 2020 and healthcare brands like Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic, which I have tremendous respect for both of them in terms of relevancy, because they were so in the spotlight of helping us navigate COVID, or are they here to stay? And that's something that's going to be super interesting, but you always felt like you were getting the truth and it was always coming directly from the source. Another one I'd highlight on the page is just NPR. NPR continues to be always a great performer in our study, super dependable, super inspiring. In our study, it's the one brand that they trust more than any other media brand in the study. And it launched recently the NPR One app, which expanded its library of podcasts and the national conversation, and then just a lot of really great in the moment programming on living in a COVID-19 world. Every year we talk about NPR just helps to make sense of what's going on in the world and finding truth about the world around them. So then on the next page, on purpose and making an account, I also mentioned this, again, purpose has been a part of the brand narrative and our brand narrative of Prophet for many years. And what really matters in my life, what connects with my values and my belief systems. And a lot of us in 2020 took a closer look at our own belief systems and what we do value, and started to apply that to choices we made in brands. And I think the kind of the hollow and the superficial promises that some brands made around some of the issues that we dealt with in 2020 were called out almost immediately by consumers. And those that had been living in a purpose-based world all along, they continued to just crush it. I mentioned earlier Costco, I'm going to double down on my point. It just didn't take on an important place in our lives, but their employees, and they are frontline workers, they were heroic. They dealt with crazy madness in every aisle of Costco as there were fights going on and long lines and around cleaning supplies and toilet paper and all this stuff. And their employees always, stood by the consumer, tried to make sense of it all, and helped us all navigate through, again, a crazy year. And then Patagonia has always done really well in the study. Nothing about their purpose has changed, but it still stands for protecting all of us, protecting the outdoors, protecting public spaces, public lands, but I would say society at large. And it's really, it's one that I talk a lot about when I talk about brand bravery, or brands that lean in, or brands that are the first to step forward. Whatever the social cause is, it is Patagonia that's front and center. And by the way, it helps when your product is really good, that goes behind that brand label. So those were a few of the themes that stood out to me and Marisa and the Prophet team. And again, we could go on for another 2 days talking about all the data, because there's so much to unpack. But at this point, Julia, we'd love to open it up to see if there's any questions from those that are attending.
Yeah, absolutely. And please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, and we'll, like I said, we'll try and get to as many as we can. So here's the first question. Did purpose become more important this year?
So purpose has been a key attribute in our study since the beginning. So we understood from the studies that we've done that it's a critical driver of relevance, and it continues to be a critical driver of relevance. So it isn't necessarily more important than it was last year, but it continues to be a critical driver of relevance. And as we talked about, we're really seeing the brands that succeed there be the brands that are really leading in the overall index.
Totally agree. And just if you went back to our attributes, we've always had attributes around, it has a set of beliefs and values that align with my own in terms of me as a person, how I quote unquote go to market. We've had attributes around trust. We have attributes around meeting an important need in my life, both functionally and emotionally. So we've always tried to get it. And then the biggest one is, does it live up to the promise that it makes? And, those brands that pop in the top 50 generally do really well on all 4 of those. And to Marisa's point, purpose was just on hyperdrive in 2020 because of what was going on in the world. So I continue to see it as such and I also think, by the way, that's a big reason why there was such a shakeup in the top 50, and so many more purpose-led brands that are kind of quote unquote famous for being purpose-led have entered into that top 50.
And this is kind of an extension of that question, but how do you encourage brands to take a public stand on social issues with so many fearing public backlash?
Yeah, it's interesting. We continue to see brands, like Nike, that take a public stand, sit in our top 50. There is this notion of shares my beliefs and values can only be seen by your consumers by what you do out in the world, right? So the way that you represent your beliefs and values is by how you act and what you say. And so, there's an expectation today that brands will represent their values and demonstrate a commitment to improving society. And so, while you're never going to please everybody with where you take a stand, I don't think that consumers will allow brands to stand on the sidelines. So many of the brands in our top 50 to 100 are brands that have taken a stand. And actually, we collect some additional data on these brands that are not part of our 16 attributes, just for some of the additional context. And we looked at that very question in the data. So we know which brands people believe stood up for things that were important to them. And you can see there's some correlation between those brands that stand up and those brands that are most relevant.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we do a lot of work in the organization and culture world, the employee-based world. And when you make empty or hollow promises around some of these bigger social issues, it's your employees that call you out first, not consumers get there pretty fast. But if you're inauthentic to the way you go to market and your employees see that, they'll be the first line of offense, not defense, for your brand. So to Marisa's point, if you can't put tangible points on the board, make a commitment and put points on the board, and make sure your internal team understands what you're doing first, because they're often the ambassadors to consumers, and then go more public with it. You will be called out, as Marisa said, and so many brands did get called out back in June, July. The question I have is the heat going to continue like it was back in the summer? And we really hope that the pressure that a lot of brands felt, that they will continue to feel the pressure to meet the moment, because I don't think the moment's going away.
Right. I'm switching gears a little for a moment, and maybe we touched on this a little bit, but what was the most surprising finding to each of you in the study this year?
Yeah, so for me, I think we may have touched on this a little bit, but if you look at the top 10, most of them are not digital native brands. So in previous years, the most relevant brands have been hyper digital from birth. And what I think we saw this year was that there were a lot of brands that weren't necessarily digital native, but have transformed themselves to be incredibly relevant and adaptive and digital for today's world. So, I think that there was sort of this sense maybe a few years ago that these quote unquote legacy brands weren't going to be able to continue to compete. But I think what we're seeing is that, brands can be relentlessly relevant if they work at it, and they don't have to, call it quits and just say, well, the new digital native brands are going to win, I'm out. So there really is an ability to drive relentless relevance, even among these kind of bigger, older, more legacy brands.
Yeah, I love that point, Marisa. So a couple other points I'd make is the fall of Netflix out of our top 10, and it's usually top 5, just speaks to the incredible amount of content that is out there, the streaming wars that we all know about, and most of us love, and the challenge for all of the streamers to continue to find ways to break through, and find new ways to engage with so many choices that we currently have, and then new choices that we know are coming later this year. So I'm super curious to see what happens to, Hulu used to be in our, top 20. There's YouTube used to be in our top 20. There's just so many brands that are in that space now, and I have a feeling that that's going to continue to slip. The 2 healthcare brands in our top 10, healthcare is usually done really poorly in terms of relevancy, and I wrote a book on consumer centricity in healthcare, and for most of us, we do not have a good experience in healthcare, and that's generally why most healthcare brands are not rated highly. And this was the year where healthcare and healthcare frontline workers and science, as I mentioned earlier, all took a front seat, and I'm hopeful that we continue to have this this kind of brand halo from 2020 about how critical a number of healthcare institutions are to society overall. And then just on a super personal note, like to see American Girl and Fisher Price jump into our top 20, and just the notion of playing quote unquote without technology. It's just sort of refreshing. It's no disrespect to any of the gaming brands or the digital tech brands, but it's just so refreshing to see the idea of just playing and toys and kids experiencing something else that isn't on a device or in front of a screen. Those would be some of my big surprises.
Okay, I feel like both of you are gonna have a lot of thoughts on this one. Out of the 4 principles, where do you suggest brands start when trying to grow their brand relevance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I always like to tell people to kind of start from a position of strength. So as you look at how your brand is performing across those different attributes, you know, it's important to look at, well, where are we already excelling? Like, are we really purpose-led, or, you know, are we really reliable and making it easy for our customers? Like, where are the places that you're excelling, and make sure that you continue to invest behind those aspects that for you are really working. And then I would say, take a look at, where are your gaps, right? Where are the places that you actually need to invest more because you're not currently either getting credit for what you're doing there, like consumers don't see it from you, or maybe you're not doing enough to actually meet their needs in an area, or to be relevant to them in an area. So so that's where I would say, let's start with your strengths, and then figure out where are the places that you need to go next based on where your weaknesses are.
It's hard to argue with that point. If you were gonna pin me down, though, I would say, and these are not ordered in any from left to right, but customer obsession is, to me, the portal to figuring out all of the other pillars and attributes that are in the index. And if you are not customer/consumer obsessed and don't know your customer as well as they know themselves, then it's really hard to design a brand purpose, promise, experience, approach to go to market in a way that will be super meaningful to them. So it's those 4 attributes under obsession that I would try to really double down on, because I think that's a door that's a legit door opener for the other attributes and the other 3 principles within brand relevance. Seems a little obvious that we should be customer obsessed to get to the others, but you'd be surprised how many companies haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. I expected Amazon to rank higher this year. Why do you think they ranked number 10? I think they were number 3 last year.
Yeah. So people saw them as incredibly reliable, but a little bit less inspiring, right? So some of the things that they struggled with were being seen as treating their employees well. So if you'll remember, there was a lot of in the media around, their warehouse employees being, made to feel they were at risk, or made to feel unsafe. And so, as Scott mentioned, sort of the inside outside perceptions of your brand matter. How you treat your employees, how you show up, and the culture that you're building, matters as much as what your product is. So while they still are in the top 10, they're still an incredibly strong brand. They were they are customer obsessed. It's actually one of their values, and they really showed up, pragmatically. Where they really kind of fell down was on the inspiration and even the innovation a bit this year. So they're still seen as innovative, but not as innovative as they have been in years past, when they were really kind of the first in kind to do some things. Their space, along with many others, are getting more crowded. So it's harder and harder to be the innovative leader in a space that's more crowded.
Yeah, I mean, listen, e-commerce and D2C exploded last year. The options that we all had to buy from exploded. And we realized that we didn't have to turn to Amazon or Amazon Prime for all of our needs. And again, this is, I think 2020 was a bellwether year in terms of all of us figuring out what our shopping patterns are, what our shopping needs are, and what our shopping choices are. And this was a year where we didn't choose Amazon as much as we may have in the past, or maybe we did, but we chose a lot of others to complement them. So it just wasn't. But we have to remember, being in the top 10, you're much closer to number 1 than you are to number 50. So it's Amazon, to Marisa's point, still crushed it in many ways.
All right. Well, I think we're running close to time here, so we want to be respectful of everyone. But thank you to everyone for joining us. We'll share a copy of the presentation as a follow-up. I've had a couple of people ask for it, so we'll make sure to get that out to everyone. And if you do have questions for Scott or Marisa, please get in touch. We'd be happy to answer them if we didn't get to them today. All right.
Thank you all for taking the
Thank you all
time.
for joining. Scott and I always love to share this, so we hope to see you all again sometime.
Thank you. Have a great day.